Have for 11 years. Little brown notebook, water-stained, spine cracked in 3 places. Every morning I sit on the porch with coffee so black it could stain wood, and I write down what needs fixing. East fence, 3rd post, leaning 12 degrees. Barn latch sticking again, that one shingle above the kitchen, 3rd time this season. Things like that. Small things, measurable things, things I can hold in my hands, turn over, understand. I don't know when I started needing the world to be that simple. Maybe after Ruth passed. Maybe after I realized that a man alone on 47 acres of high desert plateau has 2 choices: organize the chaos or drown in it. I chose the ledger. I chose the lists. I was not, by any reasonable definition, prepared for Alara Macon. She arrived on the 12th of October, a Tuesday, which I know because I'd written Tuesday at the top of that day's ledger page along with the temperature, 49 degrees at dawn, warming to 62 by noon, and a note about the wind shifting northeast, carrying that dry sage smell that always made my chest tight for reasons I'd never bothered to examine. The truck that dropped her off was a rusted-out Ford with New Mexico plates and a tailgate held on with baling wire. I didn't recognize the driver. Didn't get a good look at him, either. He pulled up to the end of the dirt road where it meets the county blacktop. She got out, he drove off, and that was it. No goodbye that I could see. No wave. She stood there with a canvas duffel bag over one shoulder and a cardboard box under her arm. And she looked at my ranch the way people look at a lake they're thinking about walking into. Not with hope, with calculation. I was replacing a hinge on the chicken coop, 3rd entry in that morning's ledger, and I watched her for probably a full minute before she noticed me. She was lean. Not thin the way women in magazines are thin, but lean the way a person gets when meals have been irregular and walking has been frequent. Dark hair pulled back tight. Skin that told me she'd spent years outdoors, not as recreation, but as circumstance. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Hard to tell. She had one of those faces that age had visited unevenly. Young around the mouth, older around the eyes. The eyes were what got me. Not the color, brown, dark, nothing unusual. It was the way they moved. Constant assessment. Left, right, behind, back to center. Like a deer at a water hole. Like something that had learned, through repetition, that stillness was a luxury earned only after you'd confirmed every direction was safe. I set down the screwdriver. Straightened up. My left knee popped. It always does, ever since I fell off a barn roof in 2014. Another thing I should have written in some kind of ledger, but didn't because there was no one around to care whether I was hurt. "Help you," I called. She flinched, actually flinched, at a man's voice 30 yards away in broad daylight. And then she did something I've seen exactly twice in my life. She rearranged her entire face. Smoothed it, reset it, pulled something up from inside herself that looked enough like calm to fool most people. It didn't fool me, but I'm getting ahead of things. "I'm looking for work," she said. Her voice didn't match her body. Her body said flight. Her voice said steady. There was a practiced quality to it, not rehearsed exactly, but controlled. Like someone who had learned which version of themselves was safest to show. "What kind of work?" "Any kind. I can cook. I can mend. I'm not afraid of animals." I looked at her, looked at the duffel bag, looked at the road behind her where the dust from the Ford was still settling. "You got references?" "No, sir." "Experience with ranch work?" Some meaning what?" She shifted the box under her arm. I noticed her knuckles then, red, raw, the kind of knuckles that come from scrubbing things in cold water for hours. Working hands. Not pretty, not delicate. Hands that had done what was in front of them without asking whether it was fair. Meaning I know the difference between alfalfa and Timothy hay. I can split wood without hitting my foot, and I've pulled a calf that was stuck breech at 2 in the morning in a barn with no electricity. Some. I almost smiled. Almost. I wrote later in the ledger, "Woman arrived, says she can work, gave no name yet," and below that in smaller letters, something off, "can't place it." That was the first lie I told myself. I could place it fine. I just didn't want to write it down because writing it down would mean I'd seen it, and seeing it would mean I'd have to decide what to do about it, and I wasn't ready for that. Not on a Tuesday, not with a chicken coop hinge half done. "What's your name?" I asked. Alara Macon." She said it just a beat too fast, the way you say something you've been practicing. "I'm Holly's Greer. This is the Greer property. 47 acres, 12 head of cattle, more chickens than I can count because the damn things keep finding ways to reproduce that defy my understanding of biology. I wiped my hands on my jeans. I don't have money to pay regular wages. I could offer room and board. There's a cabin past the water tank. Hasn't been used since my wife passed. But it's got a roof and a stove, and I can have it cleaned out by tonight. Something moved across her face, fast, like a cloud shadow racing across a field. Your wife passed. 3 years ago, cancer. I'm sorry. Me too. I picked up the screwdriver again because I needed something in my hand. Look, I'm not going to pretend I don't have questions. A woman shows up alone with no references and no vehicle and offers to work for room and board. That either means she's running from something or she's the most optimistic soul in the American Southwest. I'm guessing it's not the second one. She didn't deny it, didn't confirm it. She just looked at me with those assessing eyes, and I watched her calculate. Watched her weigh what to give against what to keep. It was like watching someone count cards, quick, invisible to most, but unmistakable if you knew what to look for. I need a place to be for a while, she said finally. I won't cause trouble, I won't steal, I won't bring anything to your door that isn't already there. That last part, I won't bring anything to your door that isn't already there. I turned it over in my head later, sitting in the kitchen with the ledger open, trying to parse it. It was an odd thing to say, an oddly specific reassurance, like someone promising they wouldn't set fire to your house while carefully not mentioning the matches in their pocket. But I said yes. I said yes because the cabin was empty and had been empty for 3 years, and emptiness has a weight to it that people don't talk about. I said yes because October is when the work doubles and my back doesn't have. And I said yes because something in the way she held that cardboard box, not by the bottom where it was sturdy, but by the sides, gently, the way you hold something that's alive, made me think there was more to this woman than the performance she was giving me. I was right about that. I was wrong about almost everything else. She cleaned out the cabin herself, wouldn't let me help. I left bedding on the porch, 2 blankets, a pillow, sheets that Ruth had picked out and I couldn't look at without remembering her standing in a Walmart aisle saying the blue ones, Holly's blue goes with everything. And when I came back an hour later, the door was closed, the bedding was gone, and I could hear water running inside. That evening, she knocked on the kitchen door at exactly 6 o'clock. I made soup, she said. She was holding a pot. Behind her, the sky was doing that thing it does in October, going from gold to purple without stopping at pink, like it's in a hurry to get to dark. From what was in the pantry, I hope you don't mind. I minded. Not the soup, the intrusion into the kitchen, into Ruth's space, into the cans and jars that were still arranged the way Ruth had arranged them. Labels out, alphabetical, because Ruth was the kind of person who believed that order was a form of love and disorder was a form of giving up. But I didn't say that. I said, come in. The soup was good. Potato and onion with rosemary she'd found dried in a jar above the stove. We sat at the kitchen table and ate without talking much, and I studied her the way I study a fence line, looking for the weak spots, the places where pressure had been applied and the structure had given way. She ate slowly, deliberately, not savoring, rationing. Like someone who wasn't sure when the next meal would come, even though she was sitting in front of a full pot of soup she'd made herself. That kind of eating is learned. You don't pick it up in a week or a month. It takes years of uncertainty to teach your body to treat food as a negotiation rather than a given. Where are you from? I asked, not because I expected a real answer, because silence at a dinner table makes me twitch. Another thing I should probably write in a ledger somewhere. New Mexico, southern part. Family. No. One word closed like a door, not slammed, eased shut. The kind of no that has a whole house behind it. All right, I said, and I let it go. Because I've learned, from Ruth, from years of living with someone who carried her diagnosis for 4 months before telling me, from understanding too late that people hold things back not out of cruelty, but out of a desperate need to control the one thing they still can. I've learned that pushing a closed door just breaks the frame. The next morning I found my repair ledger on the kitchen table where I'd left it, and next to it, in handwriting that was small and precise and nothing like mine, a note. The cabin faucet drips. I fixed it with plumber's tape from the barn. Also, the south-facing window doesn't latch properly. I shimmed it with a folded piece of cardboard for now, but it'll need a proper fix before winter. I stared at that note for a long time. Then I opened the ledger and crossed off cabin faucet and south window, both of which had been on my list for 6 months. Below her note I wrote, she notices things. And below that, so do I. The first week was cautious, circling, two people sharing 47 acres in a silence that was sometimes comfortable and sometimes not. She worked hard, I'll give her that without qualification. Harder than she needed to. She was up before me most mornings, and I'm a 5:15 riser, which means she was operating on something other than discipline. Fear, maybe. The need to prove she was worth the space she occupied. I recognized it because I'd felt it myself, years ago, when I first took over this ranch from my father and spent every waking hour trying to earn something that had already been given to me. She had a way with the animals that I didn't expect. Not gentle exactly, practical. She talked to the cattle while she worked, low and steady, not words so much as sounds, a constant murmur that kept them calm in a way my silence never had. The chickens followed her. Actually followed her like she was some kind of poultry Pied Piper, which would have been funny if it hadn't been so strange. On the fourth day, I came around the barn and found her standing at the fence line that borders the Nez property to the east. She was staring out across the scrubland toward the mesa, and her hands were gripping the top rail so hard her knuckles had gone white. "You all right?" I asked. She let go of the fence like it had burned her, turned around, rearranged the face again, that quick, practiced reset I was starting to recognize like a refrain in a song you can't stop hearing. "Fine, just looking." "At what?" "The mesa, the light on it, the way the rock changes color." She was lying. She'd been looking at the road. The road that curves around the base of the mesa and connects to the highway that goes south to Las Cruces and north to Albuquerque, and all the directions a person might run or be followed. I didn't call her on it. I wrote in the ledger that night, day 4, she watches the road. She thinks I don't notice. I notice everything, wish I didn't. On the 6th day, I drove to town for feed. 80-pound bags of sweet grain, a salt lick fencing staples. I stopped at Mora's Hardware for the staples and ran into Henry Lozen, who runs the auto shop on the edge of town and whose grandmother was Mescalero Apache, and whose opinion I trust more than most people's, mainly because he never offers it unless asked. "Heard you got someone staying out at your place," Henry said. "Word travels." Darla Nez saw a woman hanging laundry, called Peggy Waite. Peggy called my sister called me. "That's a lot of phone calls about laundry." Henry leaned against the counter. "He's got 20 years on me, mid-60s, gray at the temples, hands like leather. And he has this way of being still that makes you want to fill the silence, which is exactly his intention." "Young woman?" he asked. "Younger than me, older than young." "Alone?" "Alone." He nodded, didn't ask more. But as I was leaving, he said, "My grandmother used to say that when a wounded animal comes to your water, you don't ask who wounded it. You just let it drink." I sat in the truck for a minute after that, engine running, Henry's words settling into the space between what I knew and what I was pretending not to know. He'd seen it too. Without even meeting her, just from the shape of the story. A woman, alone, no references, no car, no family, he'd drawn the outline and recognized the picture. I drove home, unloaded the feed, found Alara in the barn, brushing down the old quarter horse, Declan, who normally doesn't let anyone but me within arm's reach. Declan had his head low, eyes half closed, leaning into her hand like he'd known her all his life. "He's beautiful," she said without turning around. "He's 17 years old and he kicks." "He hasn't kicked me." "Give it time." She laughed. It was the first time I'd heard her laugh, and it caught me off guard, low, short, surprised out of her like a bird startled from a bush. Like she hadn't expected it either. That night I sat on the porch with the ledger and tried to write down what I'd observed, and for the first time in 11 years, the words felt inadequate. I couldn't reduce her to a line item. Couldn't measure the lean of her the way I measured fence posts. Couldn't calculate the degree of her damage the way I calculated shingle deterioration. She was not a problem to be logged and solved. She was a person, full of angles I couldn't see and weight I couldn't measure. And the ledger, my beautiful, orderly, water-stained ledger, had no column for that. I wrote day 6. She laughed today just once. I think it surprised her more than it surprised me. And below that, after a long pause during which the coyotes started up in the draws and the stars came out one at a time like they were checking to see if it was safe, Ruth would have known what to do. Ruth always knew what to do with broken things. I just know how to write them down. The end of the first week is when the cardboard box opened. Not literally, She still kept it in the cabin, tucked under the bed where she thought I wouldn't notice, but where I noticed because noticing is the disease I've given myself in place of the loneliness that would otherwise eat me alive. But figuratively. The box opened because on day 7 she got sick. I heard it from the porch at dawn. Retching. That unmistakable, awful sound that the body makes when it's rejecting something it can't hold. I set the coffee down and walked to the cabin, and I didn't knock. I should have knocked, I know that. But the sound was bad and the morning was cold, and sometimes you act before you decide. And I pushed the door open, and she was on her knees by the bed, hair loose, skin gray, shaking. "Ilara." "Get out," barely a whisper, but sharp. "You're sick." "Get out." I stepped back, closed the door, stood on the porch of the cabin with my hands shoved in my pockets, breath fogging in the October air, and I waited. Listened to her retch again, then stop, then cry, quiet crying, the kind that people do when they've learned that loud crying draws attention and attention draws danger. She came out 20 minutes later, washed face, hair pulled back again, the mask back on but thinner now. Translucent, I could see through it to the terror underneath. "I'm fine," she said. "You're not fine. It's nothing, bad stomach, the water maybe. The water's been tested, it's clean." She looked at me, and I looked at her, and the thing that had been sitting between us since the moment she stepped off that rusted Ford, the unnamed, unmeasured, unledgered thing, sat there in the cold morning air and breathed. "How far along are you?" I asked. The mask didn't crack. It dissolved, like frost on a window pane when you press your palm to it. Her face went through 4 things in 2 seconds: shock, fear, calculation, and then something I hadn't seen before. Something that looked, if I'm being honest, like relief. 8 weeks, she whispered. And then she sat down on the cabin steps and put her face in her hands, and I stood there in the cold with my empty coffee cup and my useless ledger, and the understanding that the list of things that needed fixing on this ranch had just gotten longer than. I didn't ask who the father was. That first morning, standing there in the frost-thick air while she sat on the cabin steps with her face in her hands, every instinct I had, every rancher's reflex to identify the source of a problem and trace it back to root cause, told me to ask. But I didn't, and I want to be clear about why, because it matters. It matters because the reason I didn't ask is the same reason Henry Lozen's grandmother said what she said about wounded animals and water. It wasn't kindness. Kindness would have been kinder. Kindness would have been soft words and a warm hand on her shoulder, and all the gentle things Ruth would have done because Ruth was built for gentleness in a way I never was. What kept my mouth shut was something harder than kindness. It was recognition. I recognized the shape of a person who had been asked too many questions by people who used the answers as weapons. I recognized it because I'd watched Ruth in her last year sit in doctors' offices and answer question after question. When did the pain start? How severe on a scale of 1 to 10? Have you considered your options? And I'd watched the asking strip something from her piece by piece until the woman who came home from those appointments was smaller than the woman who'd left. Questions can be a form of violence. I don't think most people know that. So I didn't ask. I said, "There's a clinic in town, Dr. Herrera, she's good." Ilara looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and I was beginning to understand that this was how she operated, falling apart and holding together simultaneously, like a wall with cracks that still bears weight. "I can't go to a clinic." "Why not?" She shook her head, another door closing. But this time I heard what was behind it, not stubbornness, not secrecy for its own sake, but fear. The specific, practiced fear of a person who believes that visibility equals vulnerability, that being seen means being found. "Okay," I said, "not today, but soon. You need care." "I need to work." "You need both." She stood up, wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened herself the way you straighten a picture frame, minor adjustment, major difference. "I'll start on the coop. Yesterday's feed tray warped." And she walked past me, past the cabin, past the water tank, and into the barn, and I stood there holding my cold coffee and thought, "Holly's Greer, you are in over your head." Then I went to the porch and opened the ledger and wrote, very carefully, "She's pregnant. 8 weeks. Afraid of clinics, afraid of being found." Below that I wrote, "Not my business." Below that I crossed it out. October turned hard in the 2nd week. Temperature dropped 15 degrees overnight, and the wind came off the mesa like it had somewhere to be and was angry about being late. I spent 3 days patching the barn roof, which had been on my ledger since July and which I'd been putting off because it meant climbing a ladder and my knee turns into a percussion instrument above 10 feet. Alara worked the ground level, mucking stalls, restacking hay bales, replacing a section of fence rail that a bull had leaned through back in August. She didn't slow down. If anything, she moved faster, like she was trying to outwork the nausea that hit her every morning and sometimes again in the afternoon. I started leaving crackers by the cabin door, just a sleeve of saltines on the step, no note, no acknowledgement. The first day she didn't mention them. The second day they were gone when I checked. The third day I found a single cracker left on the porch railing outside my kitchen, placed upright, leaning against a pebble. I still don't know if that was a thank you or a message. I kept it in the ledger, cracker on railing, significance unclear because the ledger doesn't judge. The ledger just records. On the 15th day, a Sunday, she asked to use the kitchen. I was sitting at the table doing accounts, the real ones, not the repair ledger, the ones that tell you whether a ranch is surviving or slowly dying, and mine was doing both depending on which column you read. And she knocked twice, quick and precise, the way she did everything. "I'd like to bake," she said, "if that's all right." "Bake what?" "Bread." I waved her in. I should have left, probably, given her space. But the accounts were spread across the table, and I'm stubborn about routine, and she'd have to work around me. And she did, moving through Ruth's kitchen like she'd memorized it through the walls. She found the flour without asking. Found the yeast. Found the big ceramic bowl that Ruth used for dough, the one with the chip on the rim that I'd been meaning to fix for 5 years, and never had because fixing it would mean acknowledging that Ruth's hands had been the last ones to use it. Alara's hands were in it now, and I watched her knead the dough and tried not to feel something about it and failed. She worked in silence for a while. Her hands were strong. I'd noticed that already, the raw knuckles, the competent grip. But there was something else in the way she handled the dough. A rhythm, a steadiness. Like this was a thing she'd done 1,000 times, and the doing of it was where she kept whatever piece she had. "My mother taught me," she said, not looking up. "Bread first, before anything else. She said if you could make bread, you could survive anywhere." "Your mother sounds practical." She grew up on the reservation, San Carlos. Everything she knew, she learned from scarcity. She pressed the heels of her hands into the dough, folded it, pressed again. "She used to say that the land teaches you if you're quiet enough to listen. I never understood that until I was older, until I had to be quiet." It was the most she'd said about herself since arriving. I sat very still, the way you sit when a wild bird lands near you and you know that any movement will send it flying. "She passed when I was 17, Alara continued. "After that, I was alone, did what I could, waitressing, cleaning. Married young because that's what you do when alone feels like falling and someone offers you a floor to land on." She stopped kneading, looked at her hands. "Floors can be hard," she said. I didn't say anything, not because I didn't want to, because the space she was building with her words was fragile and mine would have been too heavy for it. She covered the dough with a cloth and washed her hands in the sink, and while the water ran, she said, quietly, almost to herself, "His name was Carter, the man I married. He was good at first. They usually are. It's later that you learn what you've agreed to." My pen was in my hand. I realized I'd been holding it the entire time, gripping it like a rail on a moving train. I set it down. "Alara, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to. I want to. I want someone to know, even if knowing doesn't change anything. Because carrying it alone is." She turned off the water, dried her hands on the towel by the stove. "It's heavy, Hollies, it's so heavy." I nodded, because it was the only honest thing I could do. "He didn't hit me at first," she said. And then she told me, standing in Ruth's kitchen with flour on her wrists and bread rising under a cloth, what Carter Macon had been. Not all of it, not the details. She gave me the architecture, not the rooms, the shape of years spent navigating a man who used control the way other men use tools, precisely and with purpose. Who monitored her movements, her phone, her friendships, her body. Who never left marks where anyone could see them, and who, when she told him about the pregnancy, looked at her with something she described as ownership and said, "Good. Now you can't leave." She'd left anyway, 3 weeks before showing up at my gate. Left with the duffel bag, the cardboard box, and a half-tank of gas in a borrowed car that she'd abandoned in Deming because Carter knew the plates. "The box," I said, "under your bed." She looked at me. You noticed. I notice everything. It's a problem. Something close to a smile, not quite, a sketch of one. It's my mother's things, all I took. A blanket she made, some photographs, a cup she used to drink coffee from every morning. Stupid things, things that don't matter. They matters. They don't help. Those aren't the same thing. She stared at me for a long moment, and I felt something shift, not dramatically, not like a hinge swinging, more like the ground settling after a tremor. A new arrangement of weight between us. She'd given me pieces of herself, and I hadn't used them to cut her. That was, I understood, a test she'd been giving me since day one. Every small offering, the soup, the repair note, the laugh in the barn, had been a test. And every time I hadn't demanded more, hadn't pushed, hadn't leveraged what she'd shared into a weapon of inquiry, I'd passed. The bread will take an hour, she said. I'll come back for it. She left. I sat at the table surrounded by numbers that wouldn't add up and thought about Carter Macon, whom I had never met and hoped I never would. Because I am not a violent man, but I am a man who knows how to swing an axe, and there are limits to what a good man can hear without wanting to use that knowledge. I wrote in the ledger, she told me, not everything, enough. The husband is dangerous, the pregnancy is his. She's here because she's afraid, and this was the farthest she could get on half a tank. Then I sat for a while, and then I added, the bread smells like Ruth's kitchen used to smell. I didn't know I'd forgotten. The bread was good, dense and crusty, with a warm center that steamed when I tore it open. We ate it that evening with butter and the last of the season's canned tomatoes, and for the first time in 3 years, the kitchen table felt like a table instead of a memorial. We settled into something after that. Not a routine exactly, routines are planned, and this was more like two rivers finding a shared channel. She worked mornings, I worked mornings. We crossed paths at the barn, the water tank, the fence line. She cooked most evenings because she wanted to and because my cooking was, by my own admission, an act of survival rather than art. I kept the ledger. She kept the cabin. The pregnancy existed between us like a third person who hadn't been introduced yet, but whose presence everyone acknowledged. On the 22nd day, I drove her to Dr. Herrera. This required negotiation. 3 days of it careful and circling, neither of us saying the thing we were actually arguing about. She said she was fine. I said fine wasn't a medical term. She said she'd been through worse. I said that was exactly the problem. She said she couldn't risk being in a system. I said Dr. Herrera had been practicing medicine in this town for 30 years, and had delivered half the population and buried the other half, and could be trusted with a secret the way a vault could be trusted with gold. What changed her mind wasn't my argument. It was the morning sickness getting worse. Day 20, she couldn't keep anything down, not water, not crackers, not the ginger tea I bought in town because the internet said it helped. She was pale in a way that scared me, pale the way Ruth had been pale at the end, and I couldn't watch it. I couldn't sit on my porch with my ledger and document a woman fading. I'll drive, I said on day 22. We'll use the back entrance. I'll stay in the truck. No one will know. She argued for 10 more minutes. Then she got in the truck. Dr. Herrera was a small woman with a big voice and the kind of competence that made you feel calmer just by proximity, like standing next to someone who knows CPR. You haven't needed it yet, but the knowledge that they could do it changes the room. She took Alara behind a door, and I sat in the truck and looked at the mountains and thought about Ruth and thought about Carter Macon, and thought about the fact that I was now, without having planned it or consented to it, involved. Alara came out 40 minutes later. She looked different. Not better exactly, still pale, still thin, still held together with that invisible wire she used in place of peace. But different, like something had been confirmed that she'd been afraid to believe. "Everything okay?" I asked. She got in the truck, closed the door, sat for a moment. 10 weeks, she said. Healthy, both of us. Both of us? I let that sit in the cab of the truck the whole drive home. Those 2 words filling the space like the smell of bread, warm and real and impossible to ignore. That night I was on the porch when she came and sat on the step below me. Not next to me, below. Looking out at the same sky, the same mesa going dark against the stars, but from a different angle. She had the blanket from the box, her mother's blanket, I realized, wrapped around her shoulders. It was woven wool, red and brown and black, the pattern geometric and precise, the kind of work that takes months of sitting with thread and intention. "San Carlos," I said, looking at the blanket. My mother made it a patchy pattern. She learned from her grandmother who learned from hers. She pulled it tighter. I used to watch her work. She had a loom in the kitchen, and the sound of it, the shuttle going back and forth, was the sound of being safe. I can still hear it sometimes when it's quiet enough. It's quiet here. I know, she paused. That's why I'm afraid. I didn't understand that then. I wrote it down. She says she's afraid of the quiet, seems backward, and moved on. It wasn't until later, weeks later, that I understood what she meant. That quiet was where the memories lived. That noise, Carter's voice, Carter's demands, Carter's footsteps in the hall had been terrible but also distracting. The way a storm is distracting, and when the storm stops, you're left standing in the silence with the damage clearly visible for the first time. The quiet was where she had to look at what had been done to her, and looking was the hardest part. Henry Lozen came by on the 26th day. He does that sometimes, pulls up in his truck, doesn't get out, waits on the driver's side until I come over, and then talks through the window like we're at a drive-thru and he's ordering something he hasn't decided on yet. It's his way. I stopped questioning it years ago. Brought you a fan belt, he said, handing me a box through the window. For the tractor. Figured you'd need it before you remembered to buy it. Thanks, I tucked it under my arm. Come in, coffee. In a minute. He was looking past me toward the barn where Alara was leading Declan out to the paddock. She moved with the horse like she'd been doing it her whole life, one hand on the halter, the other on his neck, her stride matching his, easy and fluid. She's good with him, Henry said. She's good with everything. He watched for another moment, then he looked at me. She Apache. I hesitated. It wasn't my information to give. But Henry had asked the way Henry asked things, not with curiosity but with recognition, the way you identify a relative in a crowd. He'd seen something in her movement, her bearing, her relationship with the animal that spoke to something he knew. Her mother was San Carlos. He nodded slowly. Thought so, the way she moves, the way she talks to the horse, low, steady, like she's telling it something it already knows. My grandmother moved like that. He paused. She in trouble. She's safe. That's not what I asked. I looked at him, he looked at me. And between two men who had known each other for 20 years, a conversation happened without words. I told him with my silence that yes, she was in trouble, and that the trouble had a name I wasn't going to say, and that it might eventually come down the road that curves around the mesa. And he told me with his that he understood, and that the road passed his shop before it reached my gate, and that he'd be watching. I'll take that coffee now, he said, and he got out of the truck. I introduced them, Henry and Alara, in the kitchen, and something happened that I'd never seen before and have never been able to adequately describe. They looked at each other the way two people look at each other when they share a language that everyone else in the room has forgotten. Not a spoken language, a historical one. A language made of displacement and survival and the stubborn act of continuing to exist in a place that had been taken and retaken and taken again. Henry said something to her in Mescalero. Not much, a phrase, maybe 2 words. Her eyes widened. I don't speak it, she said. My mother tried to teach me, but... That's all right, Henry said. The words aren't the important part. He stayed for an hour, drank 2 cups of coffee, told Alara about his grandmother's ranch, which had been 3 miles east of here before the government took it in 1953 and turned it into grazing lease land for a family from Denver who never even visited. About how his grandmother had moved to town and opened a laundry and raised 4 children and never once said she'd been wronged. Because to say it would have been to admit that someone else had the power to wrong her, and she refused to give them that. Alara listened the way the desert listens to rain, completely, without waste, absorbing everything. After Henry left, she sat at the kitchen table for a long time, her hands flat on the wood, and I could see her processing, taking Henry's story and holding it up against her own, finding the places where they overlapped, the displacement, the theft of something that should have been secure, the rebuilding from what was left. He's kind, she said. He's honest, sometimes those look the same. Sometimes they don't. Which one are you, Holly's? I thought about it, really thought about it, because she deserved a real answer. I'm trying to be both, I said. Most days I fall short of at least one. She looked at me with something that I'm going to call trust, even though trust is too clean a word for what it actually was. What it actually was the beginning of trust. The raw materials laid out, the foundation poured, the first beams going up. Not the house. Not yet, but the belief that a house could exist. Thank you, she said, for not asking. Asking what? Any of it, all of it, who the father is, why I didn't leave sooner, what kind of woman lets it get this bad, whether I provoked it. Whether I stayed because some part of me wanted to. Her voice cracked on that last one, a hairline fracture running through stone. Those are the questions people ask. Those are the questions that make you smaller every time you answer them. I know. How do you know? Because Ruth got sick and people asked her things like, have you tried positive thinking? And my aunt cured her cancer with turmeric, and I watched each question take something from her. So I know. She put her hand on the table, palm up. Not reaching for mine, just open, just there. And I looked at it, the raw knuckles, the work lines, the strength and the damage written across it like a map, and I put my hand over hers. We sat like that for maybe a minute, maybe less. The kind of minute that rewrites everything that comes after it. Then she pulled away gently and stood and said, "The bread needs punching down," and went back to the counter. And the kitchen filled again with the sound of hands working dough, steady and... November came in like a held breath. The temperature dropped below freezing on the first night, and I lay in bed listening to the pipes complain and thinking about the cabin, about whether the stove was drawing properly, about whether she had enough blankets. I got up at 4:30, not because I'd decided to check, but because my body made the decision before my mind could object, which is how most of my important decisions happen, and which is probably why the ledger exists, because at least on paper I can pretend there's deliberation. The cabin light was on, yellow and warm through the window. I stood in the dark 20 yards away and watched the shadow move behind the curtain up, pacing up and down the length of the small room, and I understood that 4:30 in the morning is a specific kind of lonely. The kind where the world is so quiet you can hear your own fear breathing. I went back inside, made coffee, wrote in the ledger November 1, first freeze. Cabin light on at 4:30, she doesn't sleep. Note, check stove flue, insulate water line before next week. The ledger was getting strange. I noticed it that morning, paging back through October's entries, and what I saw was a slow transformation I hadn't consented to. The early pages were normal, hinges, shingles, fence posts, practical things with practical solutions. But somewhere around October 12th, the entries had started drifting. She watches the road. She laughed today. The bread smells like Ruth's kitchen. My repair ledger had become something else, a record of her. A documentation of someone arriving, not on the ranch, that had already happened, but arriving in the space behind my ribs where I'd been storing absence for 3 years. I closed the ledger, opened it again, closed it. Some things you can't fix by writing them down. The question of Carter Macon resolved itself in the second week of November, though resolved is too strong a word. What it did was arrive. The way weather arrives, you watch it build on the horizon, you track it, you know it's coming, but knowing doesn't stop the wind. It started with the phone. I'd given Alara a prepaid phone from the hardware store, nothing traceable, one of those flat plastic things that does calls and texts and nothing else. She used it sparingly. I never asked who she called. But on November 9th, I was in the barn sharpening tools when I heard her voice from outside the south door, low and tight, the tone people use when they're trying to control something that's refusing to be controlled. I didn't eavesdrop. I stopped sharpening. The metal-on-stone sound would have covered her voice anyway, but I stopped because continuing felt like a kind of lie, and I'd had enough lies in my mouth since October. She came in 5 minutes later. Her face was the old face, the mask, the reset, the performance of calm, but her hands were shaking. She shoved them in her jacket pockets, but I'd already seen. "Problem," I said. "No. Ilara's." She looked at the wall, at the tools, at anything that wasn't me. "My sister called. I have a sister in Tucson. I haven't told you about her because..." She stopped. "Because telling people things gives those things edges, and edges cut." "What did she say?" "She said Carter's looking. He's been through Deming. He found the car." The air in the barn changed. Not literally, the temperature was the same, the light was the same, the smell of hay and old wood and horse was the same. But something pressurized, like the moment before a thunderclap when you can feel the electricity in your teeth. "How far is Deming from here?" she asked, even though she already knew. 4 hours, maybe less. "He'll come here eventually. He'll check everywhere. He doesn't stop." She said it flatly, Not with fear, though the fear was there, packed tight beneath the surface, but with the exhausted certainty of someone stating a natural law. Water runs downhill. The sun sets in the west. Carter comes looking. "Let him come," I said. I didn't plan to say it. It came from the same place that had gotten me out of bed at 4:30. The place below thought, below deliberation, the place where a man's body makes decisions that his mind would argue against if given the chance. And as soon as I said it, I knew I meant it, which was more frightening than Carter makin', because meaning it meant I had stopped being a bystander. Meaning it meant she was mine to protect, and that word, mine, was a word I hadn't used about another person since Ruth's funeral, and it sat in my chest like a coal. "Hollies, you don't understand." "I understand enough. He's not just angry, she struggled. "He's convinced. He believes I belong to him the way you believe this ranch belongs to you. It's not a feeling, it's a fact in his head, and you can't argue someone out of a fact. I'm not going to argue. I'm going to be here. And this ranch has been here since 1974, and it doesn't move. He can come and stand at the gate and look at 47 acres of ground that isn't his, and he can decide what to do about it, and then I'll decide what to do about him." She stared at me, and for the first time the mask didn't just slip, it was absent. Gone. What was underneath was raw and young and completely terrified, and I realized that she'd been carrying not just the fear of Carter, but the fear of what would happen when Carter and the world she'd built here collided. Because collision meant choosing. Collision meant staying or running, and she'd been running so long that staying felt like a different kind of danger, the danger of having something that could be taken. "Why," she whispered, "why do you care?" "Because you showed up at my gate, and you fixed the faucet, and you made bread in Ruth's kitchen, and you laugh like you're surprised to be alive, and you're carrying a child who deserves to be born somewhere that isn't the back seat of a borrowed car on a highway between one bad place and another." I was breathing hard. I don't make speeches. I write in ledgers. I measure things. I fix hinges. But the words came out like they'd been waiting, stacked up behind the dam of my silence for weeks, pressing against it, finding the cracks. And because I lost Ruth and I couldn't do anything about that, I couldn't fix it. I couldn't write it down in a way that made it make sense, but I can do something about this. I can be here. I can be between you and whatever's coming. And maybe that's selfish, maybe I need to do it more than you need me to, but I don't care. I don't care about the purity of my motives. I care about you being safe. The barn was very quiet. Declan shifted in his stall. A hen clucked somewhere outside, oblivious to everything, which is the gift of being a chicken, the glorious, enviable gift of existing without narrative. Alara took her hands out of her pockets. They'd stopped shaking. She looked at them front, back, front again, the way you look at tools you're reassessing. Then she looked at me. "Okay," she said. One word, but it was the right one. Henry came over the next day. I didn't call him. He just appeared, the way he does, truck in the driveway, window down, something under his arm. This time he got out. What he had was a rifle. Old, bolt-action, the kind that ranchers keep for coyotes and emergencies. He held it out to me. "Heard a truck's been asking around in Hatch about a woman," he said. "White Dodge, Texas plates. Darla Nez saw it at the gas station." "How does Darla Nez see everything?" "Because Darla Nez is everywhere, and we should all be grateful she's on our side." He set the rifle against the porch rail. "You know how to use this." "I do." "You know when to use it." "I do." "Good." Because knowing and doing are different things, and the space between them is where most mistakes live. He looked toward the cabin, where Alara was visible through the window, sitting at the small table working on something. "She's got family." "A sister, Tucson." "The sister any help?" "Doesn't sound like it." Henry nodded. He was quiet for a while, and the quiet between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of quiet that exists between people who have said everything they need to say and are now just standing in the territory they've agreed on. "My grandmother was moved 5 times, he said eventually. 5 different places the government said was home, and 5 different times she packed what she could carry and walked. She never fought back the way people think fighting back should look, no guns, no standoffs, nothing for the newspapers. She fought back by existing. By waking up every morning and grinding corn and weaving blankets and teaching her children the words for water and sky and home. She fought back by refusing to disappear." He looked at me. "That woman in there is fighting back the same way. She got up. She left. She carried her mother's things across state lines. She's growing a life inside her body while her body is scared and sick and exhausted. That's not running. That's the oldest form of resistance there is. I didn't write that down. I didn't need to. Some things engrave themselves. Carter Macon came on November 17th, a Tuesday. I know because I'd written the day and date at the top of the ledger page along with the temperature, 31 degrees at dawn, and a note about ice on the water trough. I saw the truck before I heard it, white Dodge, just like Henry said. It came around the mesa curve slow, not lost slow, but looking slow, and pulled off the blacktop at the mouth of the dirt road, sat there, engine running. I was on the porch. I set the coffee down. I set the ledger down. I did not pick up the rifle, but I knew where it was, inside the door, within arm's reach. And I knew that knowing where it was changed the geometry of the morning in ways I couldn't fully calculate. Alara was in the cabin. I didn't know if she'd seen the truck. I hoped she hadn't. The truck sat for 4 minutes, I counted. Not dramatically, I just looked at my watch at the start and the end because that's what I do. I measure. Even when the thing being measured is threat, I measure. Then the door opened and a man got out. Carter Macon was not what I expected. I don't know what I expected, something monstrous maybe, something with visible edges that matched the damage he'd inflicted. But he was average, medium height, brown hair. Jaw that might have been handsome once, before whatever lived behind his face had started pressing outward. He wore a denim jacket and clean boots, and he stood by his truck with his hands at his sides, and looked at my ranch the way a man looks at a locked room when he believes the key is rightfully his. "Help you?" I called, same words I'd used on Alara, different music. He walked up the road, not fast, not slow, measured, controlled, like every step was a statement of intent. "Looking for my wife," he said. His voice was calm, pleasant even, the kind of voice that makes you doubt the things you've been told because how can this reasonable-sounding man be what she described? And that doubt, I recognized it immediately, was his weapon. That doubt was the crack he'd slide through. The first, most important manipulation, seem reasonable, make them question her. "No wives here," I said, "just me and some cattle." "Her name's Alara, dark hair, thin. She might be going by a different name." "Don't know anyone like that." He looked at me, measured me the way I'd measured him, two men taking each other's dimensions. "I've looked at fence posts with more warmth. Someone in Hatch said a woman matching her description has been seen on a ranch out this way." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. It didn't try to. "I'm worried about her. She's not well. She left home without her medication, without telling anyone. I just want to know she's safe." The performance was good. I'll give him that. The concern in his voice was pitch perfect. The worried husband, the caretaker, the man just trying to help. If I hadn't spent 5 weeks watching Alara shake at the sound of a truck engine, I might have believed it. If I hadn't seen the raw knuckles and the rationed eating and the way she flinched at a voice from 30 yards away, I might have offered him coffee and sympathy. But I had seen, and seeing is its own kind of obligation. "Mister, I told you, no one here but me. You're welcome to look around if you want, but there's nothing to see. Just 47 acres of not your business." The smile thinned, not disappeared, thinned, like a blade turning edge on. "I have a right to find my wife." "You have a right to stand on a public road. This isn't a public road. This is my property, and I'm telling you there's no one here you're looking for." He stood very still, and in the stillness I saw it the thing Alara had described, the conviction, the absolute granite certainty that the world owed him something, that what he wanted was what was right, and that anything standing between him and it was not an obstacle but an insult. It was in his eyes, cold, patient. The patience of a man who believes that time is on his side, because time has always been on his side. "I'll be back," he said, not a threat, a fact. He turned, walked to his truck, got in, drove away around the mesa, and I watched the white shape of the Dodge until it disappeared, and then I stood on my porch for another 5 minutes in the 31-degree air, my hands steady and my heart hammering, thinking, that is not a man who gives up. That is a man who recalculates. I went to the cabin, knocked. She opened the door, and I saw immediately that she'd seen. Her face was white, her hands were on her stomach, and the blanket from the box was around her shoulders like armor. "He'll come back," she said. "I know. I should go. Before he... No. Holly's..." "No," I said it the way you say things when you've finished negotiating with yourself. Flat. Done. You are standing on solid ground, my ground, and I am standing on it with you, and I am not moving, and neither are you." She began to cry. Not the quiet crying I'd heard through the cabin door, real crying, open, ugly, the kind that doesn't care how it looks because it's too necessary to be managed. She stood in the doorway of the cabin with the blanket and the cold air and the late autumn light, and she cried the way you cry when someone finally says the thing you've been waiting your whole life to hear, which isn't "I love you" or "you're beautiful" or any of the things songs are made of. It's "you are not moving, and neither am I." I stood there. I didn't hold her, not yet, not then. Some moments don't need hands, they just need presence. The days after Carter's visit were taut, wound tight. Every truck on the road pulled my eyes to the window. Every engine sound after dark sat me up in bed. I moved the rifle from inside the front door to the kitchen, then back to the front door, then to the bedroom, unable to decide where danger would arrive and preparing for it in every direction, which is no preparation at all but felt better than stillness. Ilara went quiet, not the careful quiet of someone guarding secrets, a deeper quiet, a more exhausted one. Like she'd spent all her energy on the crying and the confession and the 5 weeks of working and hoping and the news that Carter was close, and now her reserves were gone. She still worked morning to evening, feeding and mending and cleaning, but the rhythm had changed. Mechanical, automatic, the body doing what the body knows how to do while the mind goes somewhere else. I called Henry on the prepaid phone. He picked up on the second ring. "He came," I said. "I know, he stopped at the shop first, asked about the ranch, about who lived here. I told him I didn't know any ranch." "He believed you." "Doesn't matter if he believed me, matters that I said it." Pause. "What are you going to do?" "I don't know." "That's honest." "Henry, I don't know what I'm doing. I fix things, that's what I do. I write them in a book and I fix them and I cross them out. This isn't in the book." "Some things can't be in the book, Hollies. Some things you just have to stand in." He hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand and the ledger on my lap and the rifle by the door, and I looked out at the ranch in the late afternoon light, the colors deepening, the mesa going red, and I thought about Ruth, who had stood in her illness without a ledger, without a plan, without anything but the stubborn, unbearable insistence on living every day she was given. I went to the cabin. Ilara was sitting on the bed with the cardboard box open in front of her. I could see what was inside, a woven blanket folded small, a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band, a ceramic mug, blue, chipped at the rim, her mother's things, the things that didn't help but mattered. I sat down beside her, not close. On the edge of the bed, my boots on the floor, my hands on my knees. The cabin smelled like wood smoke and the faint, sweet scent of whatever soap she'd been using, something from Ruth's supply, probably something lavender. And the fact that she smelled like Ruth's soap caused something in me to come apart very quietly, like a knot that had been tied too tight for too long finally giving way. "I want to tell you about Ruth," I said. She looked at me, waiting. She was diagnosed in April. She didn't tell me until August. For months she carried it alone, and when I found the papers in her nightstand because she'd hidden them under a book about gardening, which tells you everything you need to know about Ruth, I was angry. Not at the cancer. At the hiding. At the 4 months of normal dinners and normal mornings and normal conversations she'd given me that were built on a secret, because she thought she was protecting me, and she was wrong. The protection was the problem. The protection was what kept me from standing with her when standing mattered. Ilara was very still. I told her that. I told her I didn't need to be protected. I needed to be there. And she looked at me with the saddest face I'd ever seen, and she said, "Hollies, I've been protecting people my whole life. I don't know how to let someone protect me." The cabin was quiet. The fire in the stove clicked. "That's what you sound like," I said. "When you talk about leaving, when you talk about protecting me from Carter, you sound like Ruth, and I couldn't save Ruth. I couldn't, the cancer didn't care about my ledger or my tools or my willingness to stand in the storm. But this is different. This is a man, not a disease. This is a problem with a name and a truck and a set of decisions he's making, and I can stand between you and those decisions. I can do that." She reached into the box, took out the blue mug, turned it in her hands. "My mother would have liked you," she said. "She liked stubborn men. She said stubborn was just another word for faithful if it was pointed in the right direction." Am I pointed in the right direction? "I think so." She set the mug down. "I think you have been since the day I got here. I just didn't know how to believe it." because every man who ever said he'd stand between me and something used it later. Used the standing as a debt. I protected you, so now you owe me. That's how Carter started, as a protector. The prison was built out of the walls he said were keeping me safe. I know, I said, and I'm asking you to trust that I'm not building walls. I'm asking you to trust that the door is open and it stays open, and that staying is your choice and leaving is your choice, and that I'll be here either way. Not because you owe me, because I'm here. She set the mug back in the box, closed the lid, put her hand on top of it flat the way she'd put her hand on the kitchen table that night. Open, just there. Okay, she said again, and then after a pause, my real name isn't Alara. I waited. It's Nayeli, my mother named me. It means I love you in Zapotec, not Apache. But my mother learned it from a friend, and she liked the sound of it, and she never cared much about doing things the expected way. Nayeli. Nobody's called me that in years. Carter didn't like it, said it was too ethnic. Made me use Alara because Alara sounded normal. His word, normal. I said her name again. Nayeli. And she closed her eyes, and the expression on her face was one I couldn't name and wouldn't try to, because some things aren't meant to be written in ledgers. Some things are meant to be witnessed. Carter didn't come back, not the way I expected. Instead, 2 weeks later, a letter arrived. Not at the ranch, at Henry's shop, addressed to the rancher west of the mesa, which was Carter's version of a chess move, showing he knew where I was without having to come to the door. Henry brought it over unopened. I read it at the kitchen table while Nayeli was in the barn. The letter was polite, controlled. It said he was hiring a lawyer. It said he had rights. It said the child was his and he would pursue custody, and that anyone harboring his wife was obstructing a legal process. It was 3 paragraphs of civilized threat, every sentence designed to make me feel small, to make the ranch feel small, to make the 47 acres of solid ground feel like sand. I showed it to Nayeli. She read it without expression, set it down. He's shifting tactics, she said. When force doesn't work, he uses systems, courts, laws, paperwork. He's very good at paperwork. So we get a lawyer. With what money? With whatever money there is. There's always some. Hollies. I sold 2 calves last month. That's rent and feed for winter. But there's the back parcel, the 5 acres on the north side, the ones I've never used. They're worth something. They're worth a lawyer. She stared at me. You'd sell your land. I'd sell 5 acres of land I've never used to protect a person who's standing in my kitchen. That's not a sacrifice. That's arithmetic. I called Dr. Herrera that afternoon, not for medical advice, for a referral. She knew a lawyer in Las Cruces who handled family cases, and who, more importantly, understood that the law was sometimes a weapon, and that defending against it required someone who knew how to disarm without escalating. The lawyer's name was Sandoval, Elena Sandoval. I spoke to her on the phone for 20 minutes and she asked the right questions, which were not about Carter's behavior but about Nayeli's documentation, her timeline, her evidence, her plans for the child, her willingness to go on record. Hard questions, necessary questions, questions that built something rather than taking something away. We'll start with a restraining order, Sandoval said. Then we'll establish domicile independently, then custody. It's a process. It takes time. Time is the one thing we've got, I said. That's almost never true, but I appreciate the optimism. The last entry in the October-November ledger is dated November 29th. It reads, First snow on the mesa. Light won't stick. Nayeli felt the baby move for the first time this morning. She came to the porch and told me while I was writing, and her face was open in a way I hadn't seen, and I set the pen down because some moments should not be documented while they're happening. They should just be lived.